This is Deborah Atkinson, and you're listening to Flipping 50, where I address your top questions and struggles. I share with you what to eat, how to move, and how to think to get the energy and the vitality you want in this second and better half. In today's episode, I'm going solo. So my guest is myself. And actually, my guest is truly my invited research studies. I've been deep diving, so shameless plug right here, for the new book release on Amazon in October. Hot Not Bothered, 99 Flips so that you can master your metabolism before, during, and long after menopause. So I'm really giving quick flips that you can look at a glance, pick it up, read one, put it down, or read through all 99 of them super quickly. And we're covering exercise, but we're also covering nutrition to support that exercise and the lifestyle habits that support it. So whether you're an exercise fanatic and you're trying to dial it in to get the best results in the least amount of time, or simply the best results without being the most tired or aging yourself faster than necessary, or you're not an exercise lover, you haven't bonded yet, but you do want and are willing to take some nutrition steps and or tweak your lifestyle in order to get better results simply from the things that you're doing anyway, but with a little change. This book is definitely for you. But I've got my head buried in the quote-unquote research sand right now, which really is a fun place to be because it gets me so excited about sharing new information with you. And that's really what today is all about. This topic, feeding the muscles you've got or that you want after 50, how much protein do you need, is not new. I've covered it. In fact, I have a freebie for all of you that has been there for 3 years, and it's about teaching why we're losing muscle so much more quickly right now, why that makes it so much easier to see and feel like we've gained fat. Because as we lose muscle, metabolism slows down. We are becoming more social animals as we age. Collectively, I say that. Maybe that's not true of you, but more of us are enjoying wine these days, and more of us are maybe realizing how important our friendships are, which comes with socializing, often with food. And, if everybody else isn't going the same way you want to, not quite as health conscious, which all by itself, quote unquote, health foods and what is healthy is becoming very fluid. You're probably realizing for yourself what you thought was healthy is not serving you really well. And so you've got to define or redefine health. And it feels overwhelming at times. And I know it does for you because daily right now, I am buried in this sand of research. And, I've got a list of several of them that are controversial, meaning better word is contradicting each other. But when you dig deep into it, it's not so contradictory. So I'm going to clear a little bit of the mud, I hope, for you. It'll be a review for some of my listeners, I know that. Bear with me, but I think it's good to hear again because some of it is reinforcing changes that we need to make from habits that we've established over the first 30 or more years of our adult lives. And for some of you, this will be brand new. And it may mean that this is the first of what usually is an average of 7 times we have to hear something for it to sink in and for us to really pay attention and take it. Change doesn't happen in a linear step by step by step like you're going upstairs. Unfortunately, it's cyclical. And usually we're going around in these circles, reaching ultimately the middle, the bullet, like a spirograph, if you will. But we kind of get thrown off the Ferris wheel about 6 times before we get there to really change. And that's on average. Some of us may take more or less time, depending on how hard that information is to grasp or to change for each of us. So let's dive in. First, I have to give you just a little bit of vocabulary. So I'm going to use some of these terms, and some of them may be less familiar or confusing to you. So let me go through. Really, there are two I'm going to use. A third one kind of comes in handy as an opposite. Muscle protein synthesis. So I'm going to use that term, and often if I'm writing it in a blog, I'll use muscle protein synthesis, or MPS is what it's called. And what that means is basically how well you can use for the benefit of your muscle the protein that you eat in the food that you're taking in. So we don't do it as well as we age. At 50 or 60 or 70, we don't do it as well as we did at 20 or 30. Our muscle mass peaked at about 25 years old. And we begin losing muscle, certainly anytime after that, but at about 30, we're losing about half a pound of lean muscle a year. And that's on average. Some of us may have accelerated that by, not having great habits, maybe calorie restriction, or, other habits, lifestyle habits that depleted calories and took them from you. It might have been an illness, something you couldn't avoid, that actually contributed. But if you were resistance training during that time, you were probably losing less and maybe not losing any, which is a huge plus. By all means, if you felt like you were fit, you were running, you were doing other things, you have to realize that this is true. We know you can't outrun it. Muscle loss was happening anyway. There have been plenty of studies to look at people who resistance train versus those who simply ran or did aerobic activity. The muscle loss continued even with those who did more long distance endurance training. In fact, actually accelerated losses. Exercise is a breakdown activity. So back to muscle protein synthesis, the definition of it, how well we use it. We don't do it as well as we did when we were younger. It's like the protein may be coming in, you're eating it, but you're using less and less of it to the use of your muscles as you age. There are things you can do to enhance it. Actually, resistance training enhances it, oddly enough. And we also get better at it by taking in a greater quantity of it. So it's not that we improve, but we can be comparable to a 20-year-old if we take in more protein. So we can make the same strength gains from exercise programming and nutrition as a younger person can, and accelerate our progress the same, so long as we abide by some of the things I'm going to share with you today. All right, so anabolic state, that is anabolic state, or anabolism, means that your muscle is breaking down at a faster rate, or I'm sorry, is building up at a faster rate. Almost confused that, you and me. So anabolism is you're building back up. That means probably you're synthesizing muscle protein really well, your resistance training is right on target, and you're building up at a faster rate than you're breaking down. So that does take the adequate exercise. It takes adequate calories. If you drop too low, you have calorie restriction going on, it's going to be hard to gain lean muscle or keep it. Even though you're wanting to lose fat, you've got to balance that. And it's important that timing and the type of the food that you eat and the exercise that you do are appropriate. The opposite of anabolism, or being in that anabolic state of gaining lean muscle tissue, is catabolism. So if you're in a catabolic state, you're breaking down. And that would be something like this. You go and you do a moderate to vigorous exercise session, and then you're dieting, so you don't eat afterward, or you have a lettuce salad with zero protein, zero fat, just lettuce, carrots, vinegar, and oil. That is not going to do it. It's not going to help you, one, lose weight, because if you're losing muscle, your metabolism ultimately is going to slow down. So it's not going to be ideal. So there's anabolism, or an anabolic state, or catabolism, the catabolic state, and that's the breakdown. So those are the things that will come in handy. So I want to go through just some points, and I have in the show notes today all of the resources. So if you're somebody who likes to dig and say, prove it to me, show me where the science is, I have it for you. So I know it's really important that, for some of you, you see that. So I've got 5 studies included here. And I am also mentioning the freebie about muscle loss and the facts about muscle loss. And if you opt in to get that, you will also have the opportunity, you're certainly not obligated, to look at a $7 protein report that I put together and actually have updated very recently about older adults' protein needs based on research. So all the details are in that as well, and it's scientifically proven. It's also program proven. In the 28-day kickstart, we see it over and over and over again in clients that I'm working with. Body composition changes and metabolism changes. Weight loss happens fast and permanently. Okay, number 1 of our 5 points today. When you exercise moderately to vigorously, your muscle protein synthesis is enhanced. So what you've done is kind of opened up for, okay, I'm ready. Your muscles are like, feed me. And it's enhanced for 24 to 30 hours, but possibly as long as 48 to 72. So I mentioned that when you're resistance training regularly, you get better at muscle protein synthesis than if you don't resistance train. And it's both long-term and it's acute. So this acute factor is true for about 24 to 30 hours. So you need to be eating a higher protein diet. So you want to be sure that you get in protein an hour or 2 after a good workout. Perfect timing for feeding those muscles. But don't forget that your next meal and your next meal and your next meal also should be high in protein to make sure that you're still feeding those muscles that you ripened. But that can actually last as long as 48 to 72 hours. So for people who regularly exercise, if you're listening, this is a huge bonus. You're always in that acute post-exercise anabolic state, right? Because 48 hours, if you exercise Monday and Wednesday, moderately to vigorously, you're really enhancing that muscle protein synthesis constantly. So if you exercise 3 times a week with strenuous exercise, and that could be strength training on some days, but if you're actually doing high intensity interval training, that actually also enhances muscle protein synthesis. The breakdown is there, the rebuild readiness is also there. So you're in a great opportunity as long as you continue to meet your caloric needs, or at the very least, you've got to make sure you're hitting that protein optimal amount. And you can get more from the protein report book. But remember, I've said over and over, it's between 20 and 30 grams of protein per meal, spread out throughout the day, and I'll talk more about that. With number 2, here we go. Total protein distributed throughout the day and following exercise. Both is important for muscle protein synthesis. So it's got to be at breakfast, at lunch, and at dinner. So we had a perfect segue to this one. So it's not, you've skimped all day and then you have a big high protein meal and you say at the end of the day, well, I got X amount of grams of protein. It just doesn't work that way. Your body can optimally synthesize, somewhere between 20 and 30 grams a day for most people. What we're finding out is for older adults who are exercising and need to synthesize that protein a little bit more comparably to a younger person, in order to do it, taking in up to 40 grams of protein. And I'm going to talk about that in a second. So open the door for more. And what I would encourage you to do is at your next meal, look at labels, Google, and take a look at what you're putting on your plate naturally without thinking about it. How much protein is there? And I will tell you right now that my clients who default to the lowest and don't make the quota typically are vegan or vegetarian. And it's not that you can't accomplish it, reaching that protein quota, but you've got to put in more effort. And you want to be careful to do it, not repeating the same foods over and over and over again. So you want a wide variety in your diet. So beans, legumes, chickpeas, quinoa, looking at those bigger sources of protein from food, helping yourself out with pea or brown rice based plant-based protein shakes can be a huge help. And and then looking at high protein foods, and be careful about that definition. So there are foods that are high protein. You'll read articles that list them, but yet when you're talking, okay, if I've got to add all of these things up to reach 20 to 30 grams, and you take an egg, and is that a high protein food? Well, yes. Looking at whether it's carbohydrate, fat, or protein, it's high in protein relative to its weight, and that's the key. Sometimes high protein foods are relative to weight. Well, that doesn't really help you. You need X amount of grams. So take an egg, it's 6 grams of protein. How many of those do you have to do, right? 5 eggs, you don't want to do that very often, if at all, right? 5 eggs at one sitting. So you've got to have variety in your diet as well. So total protein distributed throughout the day at your breakfast, your lunch, and your dinner, and following exercise. And I'm going to change this up in just a second to say also pre-exercise. So pre or post. Think of it like bookends. If you've got exercise in the middle, you either want a bookend on the pre or the post exercise. So you've got high quality protein. Now it may be that your breakfast, or your lunch or dinner, ideally I love high intensity exercise earlier in the day for you. It may be that you double up and your breakfast is your pre or your post exercise meal. But if it's not, you tend to be needing to, both have a meal and then you're exercising a little bit later. Be sure that you're getting pre or post exercise nutrition in, because of that muscle protein synthesis. You start your recovery even before you begin your exercise if you have high protein meal before you exercise, and or you definitely support the anabolic state, the growth of muscle, if you get in adequate protein post-exercise. And do know this, you need to wait 60 minutes because there's a blunting effect, meaning your muscle protein synthesis is blunted for about 60 minutes after moderate to vigorous exercise. So the old school thought used to be 30 minutes, I've got to get some protein in. You actually don't want to do that. You want to wait 60 minutes if at all possible. Now, 9 times out of 10, maybe that is possible. The 10th time, maybe it's not. So do what you can. The third thing I want to share with you today is the type of protein really matters. The leucine, which is an essential amino acid, the leucine content of that protein food is important. You'll read more about it. If you do decide to get the protein report, you'll read more about the research that's been done for years. But finally, we're seeing it come out. It's a little bit more common and mainstream. So if you Google leucine, Leucine, you would come up with tons of studies. Foods that are high in leucine. The amount that seems to be ideal for optimal muscle protein synthesis is 2.3. And 2.3, we're talking about grams per serving. So that's pretty high when you look at a variety of protein shakes, for instance. Whey protein carries the most. So it's the highest in leucine naturally. You're going to find it in other places like beef and chicken. Seafood has a considerable amount. So if you're having a 4 to 6 ounce serving of high quality animal protein, you're probably getting it. So again, it's a little tougher to get in if you're vegan or vegetarian. So it is the amino acid most closely related to anabolism or muscle building. So looking at studies that have compared looking at low leucine content versus high, different kinds of protein sources, it seemed to come down to the leucine and the importance of that in the diet. Protein without leucine versus protein with leucine, much better results occurred with the protein with the adequate amount of leucine. So read your labels carefully. Make sure that you're looking for that. And then back to weigh. So I have to quantify this or qualify this because I often tell women that I'm working with in our programs, not everyone tolerates dairy anymore, and we don't always realize why we're weight loss resistant or are having skin problems or digestive issues, gas and bloating, and often it comes back to dairy products, and whey is a dairy product. So curds and whey, that's where that comes from. It's separated out. You may or may not tolerate that anymore. So take it out for a week, ideally 3 weeks, and then reintroduce it in a way that you can actually tell that it is in isolation, the reason for you maybe reacting, or it's fine. You'll know for sure, so don't guess. Number 4, older adults need more protein. So I've alluded to our muscle protein synthesis not being as good as when we were 20 or 30 for sure, compared to younger adults. So our younger selves, but you may exercise now, maybe you didn't then, and yet collectively take this in hand. Older adults versus younger adults need more protein to do the same. And I mentioned this earlier. Looking at a young adult who's actively exercising, 20 grams of protein post-exercise was enough for them to synthesize, have an anabolic state or create one, so they were building lean muscle, whereas older adults required 40 grams to do the same, so that they were back on an even scale, and the same exercise program that was appropriate for either of them could have a greater result because of the protein intake. It had to be almost double for the older adult. So know that your needs are not exactly the same, and this one is very counterintuitive. Many of us default to thinking, well, I don't need it. I'm not a bodybuilder, or I'm not as active. Actually, those are all reasons why you need more. The more active you are, the more athletic you are, the better you are at muscle protein synthesis, and the less you could get away with. But if you really want to optimize it, you need to think about upping your protein intake. So first place to start, by the way, don't just go for an arbitrary number. What I would do is look at, how satisfied are you with the results you're getting? And number 1, you've got to look and be honest with your exercise. Are you doing the right kind of weight training with major muscle groups to fatigue and at an adequate enough intensity to get some hypercompensation from your body? And if your answer is yes, then look at, okay, what am I eating now? What is my level of protein now? And before you make any changes, assess that. So then you can look at, all right, if I were to increase my protein by X amount, then stay at that level for a period of several weeks. And, with exercise, it's going to take a little time to see some change and see what difference you can make in your weight, your body composition, and, even the mirror, giving you feedback about reflection of seeing more definition or tone. You're also going to see something we're not talking about directly today, and that's satiety, staying full and satisfied for a little bit longer period of time because you're eating more protein. So number 5 brings us to the very last point today. So pre or post-exercise protein intake seems to have the same benefit. So for very long, we'd been thinking, you exercise, you work out, and you either have that short window of time in 30 minutes, you've got to get that in. We used to think that. Now we know muscle protein synthesis is not optimal. It's blunted for about an hour, but we used to think that post-exercise meal was really, really crucial for progress. What we know now is that pre or post taking that high protein meal or shake, if it is, in a smoothie format, seems to have the same effect. So it doesn't matter. And here's another thing. You don't have to do both. If you are someone who is really frail, you are having a hard time putting on lean muscle, you may want to or need to, for a short period of time anyway, try doing a pre-exercise protein shake and smoothie and doing a post-exercise high protein meal or smoothie, whichever it is, taking in high quality protein at both, like bookends. But for the rest of us, you're actually seeing some good results. You just want to make sure one or the other of those is present. So within, say, 90 minutes, of a workout, and the closer you get to the workout, the more you absolutely do want it to be more liquid, less fiber, a little less fat, so it clears from your stomach, although that's something that you can test because each of us is unique. I can do really well. In fact, I feel better having a higher level of fat, so long as it comes from something like coconut or avocado, so it's a little easier to digest. Keeps me, blood sugar stable. I've got plenty of energy. I'm not bogged down as long as I'm taking that in say, a smoothie. If I were to have, a sandwich or, say, a salad, those are not the kinds of foods really that I want sitting in my stomach right before a workout. It's just not going to feel great for me. Salad and roughage, definitely not things you want right before you work out. So you've got to, really think carefully about that. Post-exercise, you've got a little bit more of a green light, but then you want to be careful that you're getting in the protein, and that's the crucial piece. So a couple of things with that pre or post. It's got to be true that you want a non-negative caloric balance, right? So that definitely sounds like a research term, and it is, in order to best boost your lean muscle tissue. And that means if you are on a diet, you are cutting back, restricting, doing really low calorie foods, and you're trying to resistance train, that's probably going to backfire on you. It's probably better than not doing resistance training while you're on a diet, but you're going to slow yourself down. And in fact, kind of what you're doing is you're putting yourself in the middle of this push-pull. On one hand, you're trying to rev up your metabolism, and on the other hand, when you're doing a low-calorie diet, you're telling your metabolism to slow down, and it will listen. So you've got this go faster, go slower, go faster, go slower message going in, or messages going into your body, and confused, your body will not do anything, or it will slow. In terms of protecting you, that's the response. It's always going to be. So be sure you're in a non-negative. You need to have adequate calories. If you are in calorie restriction, and let's say you're a larger size person and you have a considerable amount of weight to lose, you may temporarily need to go into calorie restriction safely. Eating an adequate protein or slightly higher protein diet can help you prevent the loss of weight being lean muscle. And let me tell you how important that is. This is average, all right? Only average. Approximately 25% of every pound that you lose on average, because it can go higher, which is alarming, is attributed to muscle loss during weight loss, even with exercise. Weight training to fatigue, that means of adequate intensity, and a higher protein diet can attenuate those losses, meaning can help offset that loss of muscle or prevent it from happening. So while you're losing body fat, you're gaining lean muscle tissue. So we're kind of balancing things out so that you don't slow your metabolism. But that number can go as high as 50% if you're just dieting and you're not exercising adequately. You can be losing weight, see the scale change, but unfortunately you can see it change such that you're actually going to be slowing your metabolism, and you're going to know that needle is going to bounce back the other way. So you want to be really careful. But adequate protein really was the theme of today. And when you need to put it in, surrounding your exercise, both immediately pre and post, and then for the next, up to 48 to 72 hours, really important you keep that hyper awareness of getting an adequate protein. So if you exercise regularly, you want to adopt a higher protein lifestyle and distribute it evenly throughout the day. Morning, midday, and evening is better for your body to absorb it because it can only handle so much optimally at once. And the rest, that it says, okay, I'm on overloaded here, I can't handle that, gets stored. It doesn't matter if you're eating carbohydrate, protein, or fat. If it's too much for your body to handle at one time, it will get stored as fat. That's just the way it works, unfortunately. And remember, the leucine content is super important in your protein. And those are the tips today. So remember, the show notes is going to have everything that you need. If you have a question that I didn't answer, or maybe I created a question as you were listening, leave it below the show link at flipping50.com/podcast. I'd love to hear from you. So literally, if this was valuable, please leave me a comment. If it was confusing, let me know that so I can clarify it. And if this episode was helpful as is, please, if you do me a favor, leave a rating in iTunes and then share this with a friend. Surround yourself with a supportive community of women who are on the same journey as you. To get the most from this week's episode, go grab today's show notes at flipping50.com/podcast, where you're going to find the resources that I used today and that juicy free download about how muscle loss does not have to happen. It is not inevitable. And the things that you can do to actually slow it, knowing that the science is there to show it. You can age better than ever. Let's start flipping 50 together.